Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Rachel Belmer, and I'm the Milwaukee Art Museum's Director of Membership. And I'm so thrilled to welcome you to today's Member Art Break with Erin Crussell, who is one of the Milwaukee Art Museum's amazing curatorial assistants. For today's presentation, Erin will be talking to us about Milwaukee Scenes, an exhibition she organized for the Milwaukee Public Library's Central Library. But before we begin today, I want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you that are joining us today on this call. You are all members. Some of you are also docents. Some of you are also volunteers. And we just truly want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your support as members, for the advocacy that you do for all of the work that the museum does. You truly help make so much possible. So on behalf of everybody at the Milwaukee Art Museum, we really want to say thank you. And then before we begin today, I also wanted to give just a few details about our program format. I know many of you have joined us for a past Member Art Break, but just so you sort of know what to expect. So you will see that the chat feature is enabled below, and that's what we'll use to help answer any questions that you might have at the end of Erin's presentation. But feel free to add questions throughout the presentation. If they come to you, you don't need to sit on them, and then we'll do our best to answer them at the end. And then my colleague, Amy Kirschke, who is the museum's Director of Adult, Docent, and School Programs, and who just gave us a wave, is going to help facilitate the questions and answers. And then after the Q&A, we're also going to have an optional small group discussion. Amy will share a prompt for us to discuss, and since we do have quite a large group, we are going to utilize the breakout feature in Zoom. So you'll be split into rooms with a handful of other members for about 5 minutes. And it will be a great opportunity to connect with each other, maybe meet somebody new, somebody you might not know, but you likely will have some shared interests with. And I did want to note that the discussion portion, while I highly recommend staying, is completely optional. So we will give a moment after the Q&A for anyone to depart. And while we take a beat, my colleague Elizabeth Gasparka, who's the Milwaukee Art Museum's Development Officer for Membership, she's going to share a couple programming update notes with you all. There's a couple things we want to make sure that's on your radar. So if you do plan to skip the discussion, just hang on for a quick sec after the Q&A so you don't miss those updates. And then I think with that, we are ready to get started. So I'm so pleased and thrilled to introduce to you today our wonderful presenter, Erin Crussell. She's the Milwaukee Art Museum's curatorial assistant. Erin came to the Milwaukee Art Museum in 2016 from the Hagerty Museum of Art at Marquette University, where she served as the interim registrar. As curatorial assistant, she supports the work of the curatorial department and assists with organizing exhibitions. In addition to the Hagerty Museum of Art, Erin has worked locally at the Pitch Project Gallery and Artist Studios, Redline Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee Artist Resource Network, and nationally for the Rockford Art Museum and the Dia Art Foundation at Dia Beacon in New York. As an independent curator, Erin has organized exhibitions in Illinois, Wisconsin, and New York. Erin received her BFA in photography from the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design, following a formal education in liberal arts at Rock Valley College. She also teaches as an adjunct faculty in the New Studio Practice program at MIAD. So with that, I am so pleased to turn things over to Erin today.
Thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, and to you and Elizabeth for putting this program together and inviting me to speak on this project. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So as the exhibition has been closed since a short 5 or 6 weeks after it was installed in late January of 2020, I am particularly excited to be able to share this work with you, our museum members, as well as soon, hopefully, the larger Milwaukee community. I'm going to pre-apologize on behalf of a ferocious feline who is very likely to make an appearance at some point during this presentation. I was thrilled to curate Milwaukee Scenes for exhibition at the top of the grand staircase at the Milwaukee Public Library that is known as the Art Gallery. So in my presentation today, I'm going to address 3 questions. Why the Milwaukee Public Library, why the curatorial focus on Milwaukee Scenes, and why these artworks and artists were chosen. But first, I want to begin by acknowledging my colleagues. No project, whether large or small, at the museum is undertaken single-handedly, and the small display had many hands to support it. To Margaret Andera, Brandon Rood, and David Russick for their counsel during the curatorial process. To Rick Knight, Chris Niver from our conservation team, and Arthur Mohagan, chief preparator, for readying the works for display. And to Jane O'Meara, Neil Gasparka, and Troy Hagenbart, who installed the works. And finally, to Paula Nemeth, librarian of arts and media at the Milwaukee Public Library, for her collaboration to bring this exhibition to the public. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was born on this day in 1929. With thanks to my colleague Ariel Pate for sharing this image and quote with me this morning as a reminder to pause and to reflect that progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. We must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right. I'd like to bookend, pun intended, my specific focus on the exhibition by speaking to the longstanding relationship between the Milwaukee Art Museum and the Milwaukee Public Library. Although the relationship between the 2 Milwaukee institutions preceded it, the museum began its lending collaboration with MPL for the Central Library Art Gallery in 2001. This was in the form of a long-term loan that included works such as Fred Berman's Dark Landscape from 1983, acquired in 1995, Gibson Bird's The Field from 1977, which was acquired in 1991, among others. The next exhibition was titled Wisconsin Women Artists, which was curated by Brandon Rood, who's the Abert family curator of American art. Wisconsin Women Artists was on view at MPL from September of 2016 to January of 2020 when Milwaukee Scenes was installed. Wisconsin Women Artists included a showcase of over a century of work by Wisconsin women artists, including Elsa Emile Ulbricht, Study in Rose and Gray from 1927, which was acquired in 1976. Ana Luisa Miller's October Storm of 1949, which was acquired in 1951. And Ruth Grotenroth's Sleeping Girl, circa 1935, also acquired in 1935. Serving as collectors, cultural leaders, and educators, many of these women artists helped to establish art instruction in the city of Milwaukee and also shaped the formation and growth of the city's emergent arts and cultural organizations, from the Leighton School of Art to the Milwaukee Art Association, which was the predecessor to today's Milwaukee Art Museum. So Milwaukee Scenes, like I said, the exhibition opened at the Milwaukee Public Library in January of 2020. The paintings on view in Milwaukee Scenes show people and places of Milwaukee from the early to the late 1900s. 2 examples from the exhibition: the Placid Winterscape, A Veil of Snow by George Robb from circa 1910, acquired in 1915, and Charles Winstanley Thwaites foundry from and acquired in 1959. A portrait of two men pouring hot metal demonstrate the depth to which the artist explored their subjects: Milwaukee at rest, at work, and at play. Many of the scenes included in the exhibition reflect Milwaukee's nickname as the City of Neighborhoods, from Joseph Freebert's Sixth Ward Baseball, from and acquired in 1959, and East State Street, from and acquired in 1940, to Garrett Sinclair's Tenement, Milwaukee Third Ward, from 1943 and acquired in 1991. They speak to contrasting and complementary aspects of the city and its characteristics, and together they form a larger vision of Milwaukee. The artists of these works, whether they called Milwaukee home or not, played a role in the development and inspiration of artists and cultural organizations throughout the city. Many were also curators, collectors, and educators. Holda Rotier Fisher, for example, taught at the Shorewood Opportunity School for 30 years. And Garrett Sinclair was an instructor at the Leighton School of Art from 1920 until his retirement in 1954. And George Robb worked as the curator at the Leighton Art Gallery from 1902 until 1922. All were formative influences on generations of Milwaukeeans. The buildings pictured in Robb's A Veil of Snow are from the 700 block of North Jefferson Street, which was then across from the old Milwaukee Art Institute building and beside the old Leighton Art Gallery. Robb was born in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and was well known and accomplished in a broad range of media. He, together with Alexander Miller and Louis Meyer, two other Milwaukee influential artists, was instrumental in forming the Society of Milwaukee Artists, which was a professional association of artists that still exists today as the Wisconsin Visual Artists. As if coming full circle, Robb's work was exhibited at the Milwaukee Public Library 120 years ago in the first exhibition of the Society of Milwaukee Artists in 1901. Joseph Freebert's East State Street, a night scene that depicts the central downtown area of Milwaukee, looks west towards the Milwaukee River. An oncoming streetcar, which is the predecessor of today's The Hop, is from the original system that evolved in the mid-20th century. An accomplished artist, Freebert began to exhibit in earnest in 1935, and his works is in many museums and galleries in Wisconsin and across the region. 3 additional works by Freebert are included in the exhibition: Milwaukee Junkyard from 1946 to 1947, which was acquired in 1959. Tenements at Night, acquired in 1970 and from 1948. And the previously mentioned Sixth Ward Baseball from 1959. At the Leighton School of Art, Freebert's instructors included Robert von Neumann Sr., whose work Houses and Shacks from 1929, which was acquired in 1982, also hangs nearby in the exhibition. And Elsa Emil Ulbricht, a well-known Milwaukee artist and educator. As you may recall, Ulbricht's work was included in the previous exhibition at MPL, Wisconsin Women Artists. Freebert also studied alongside Garrett Sinclair, in addition to Tenement Milwaukee 3rd Ward, which I showed earlier. Milwaukee Scenes features Sinclair's 1937 painting Waiting for the 400, which was acquired in 1981. Hulda Retier Fisher, Blue Cloth or number 2 Studio Still Life, which is undated but acquired in 1946. This is an interior, the only one in the exhibition, which features objects from the artist's home studio, which was on North Downer Avenue, including a white vase with flowers, a wine glass, plums, and books. The artist, who exhibited widely beginning in the 1930s, participated in Wisconsin's WPA, or Works Progress Administration, which was later renamed Works Project Administration, and was a member of the Milwaukee Art Institute. Prior to becoming an educator herself, she taught at the Shorewood Opportunity School for 30 years. Fisher was, like Freebert, a student of Robert von Neumann Sr. She also studied with Carl Holte and Hans Hoffman. Two final works that are included in the exhibition are Alfred George Pelican's Under the Viaduct, which is undated and was acquired in 1948, and Charles Paul Group's The Milwaukee River, circa 1914 to 18, acquired in 1918. I will share a link of the full checklist of works in the chat after I finish presenting. And then I also want to share a selection of installation images, which is what you will see when this area of the library is reopened. Because the museum is limited in the number of works that can be on display at a given time, the partnership with MPL presents the opportunity to put before the public works that would otherwise either not be seen or would be seen infrequently. But on a personal note, this project marries two things that are a true representation of home to me, and that is Milwaukee, both as a geographical place and as a community, and public libraries. As the daughter of a librarian, I spent many of my days as a young adult at the public library in my hometown, where I also held my first job. Also, where all the women in my immediate family worked at one time or another, leading one of my sisters to her career as a librarian also. She's shown here admiring George Robb's A Veil of Snow. The Milwaukee Art Museum and the Milwaukee Public Library are both pillar institutions in the city with complementary missions. The mission of the Milwaukee Art Museum is to collect and to preserve art and to present it to the community as a vital source of inspiration and education. The Milwaukee Public Library helps people read, learn, and connect and is an anchor institution that helps build healthy families and vibrant neighborhoods, the foundation of a strong Milwaukee. There is a longstanding theme interests and commonalities of the two institutions as well, including the interest in Wisconsin arts and artists. Additionally, Milwaukee Public Library has long supported the museum's research and exhibition efforts. The museum has borrowed from MPL for specific exhibitions over the years. And a recent instance of this would be for the Portrait of Milwaukee exhibition that was presented in the Hertzfeld Center for Photography and Media Arts from 2019 to 2020, which was curated by Ariel Pate, Assistant Curator of Photography, who presented at the last member art break in December. And an archive of the history of Milwaukee is held at the Milwaukee Public Library in Special Collections through the Historic Photo Archive, the Milwaukee and Wisconsin Poster Collective, and more. I'll share links to both of those resources in the chat after I finish presenting, and I'll actually show you, just share with you what those look like. So at mpl.org, this is a display of the Historic Photo Archive webpage. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see a number of archives within the special collections of MPL, including Historic Photo Archives, and then also the poster collection, which has a variety of collections in line. The timing of the Milwaukee Scenes exhibition was to overlap with the highly anticipated 2020 Democratic National Convention, which was to be a chance to showcase these two as well as other institutions. It was also a motivating factor for, though not exclusively, for the curatorial decision to focus on artworks and artists depicting scenes of the city. And another project which I'd like to speak to briefly and share with you, as I believe it does add to the conversation of how we in the present look to celebrate and document the history of Milwaukee, was undertaken with Google Arts and Culture and the launch of the Milwaukee City page in mid-2020. It was also conceived to align with the DNC. Google Arts and Culture worked with 16 Milwaukee institutions, including the Milwaukee Art Museum, to build a Milwaukee City page, which was titled Milwaukee Fiercely Independent, Wholly Unexpected, which includes more than 2,000 pieces of art and artifacts from local institutions. I'm showing you the page here, and visitors to the page have the option to choose their own adventure and explore themes based on meeting creatives, taking a tour, exploring food, checking out art, and much more. In addition to the City of Milwaukee page, Milwaukee Art Museum's Google Arts and Culture has a partner page that my colleagues and I worked across the museum to build. Online stories, including the architectural tour, which I'm showing here. I'm not going to go into it, but, and then a history of the Milwaukee Art Museum that traces the story of the museum from its roots in Milwaukee's first art gallery, which opened in 1888, to today, where you can read more into the history of the museum that I sprinkled into today's presentation, as well as the exhibition Milwaukee Scenes. Also, Heather Winter, the museum's librarian and archivist, is a fantastic resource for accessing our own archive, the museum's. Google's platform enables us, the museum, to connect the art of our collection with new and broader audiences, both in Milwaukee and beyond. Arts and Culture Milwaukee partners, in addition to the Milwaukee Art Museum, are shown here, but include Radio Milwaukee, Visit Milwaukee, the Groman Museum at MSOE, the Harley-Davidson Museum, Imagine MKE, Sculpture Milwaukee, the Haggerty Museum at Marquette University, Milwaukee County Parks, Milwaukee Repertory Theater, Milwaukee Public Museum, Charles Alice Museum, Milwaukee Youth Symphony Orchestra, First Stage, the Chudnow Museum of Yesteryear, and the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. Milwaukee Scenes and the Milwaukee Google Arts and Culture Project are two separate but related projects. And I want to thank you for letting me share your time, and let's move to conversation.
Thank you so much, Erin. That was a delightful romp through your exhibition. As someone who, and we've run into each other, so you know that I also frequent the Central Library, and it's a really special place in our city. And I still, every time I ascend that grand staircase, it's just like this special sort of secret surprise to come across works from the collection there. And I know when we were talking about this early on, there were a number of our colleagues who didn't even realize we did this. So I'm thrilled that you've been able to present today. I guess I hope people will start to put questions in the chat, but while people are typing away, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about your process. In sort of, we have a lot of work by Wisconsin artists related to Milwaukee. So how did you start? Was it like a search through our database? Was it a walk through the vault?
It was many searches through the database, looking at different factors. Of course, again, giving credit to Brandon Rood and Margaret Indera, who helped usher me through the process and gave me suggestions of looking at different Wisconsin artists. The Wisconsin Painters and Sculptures exhibition and award was a huge help in narrowing in on artists that I might not have already been aware of in our collection. Also thinking about, we do have a lot of works by Wisconsin and Milwaukee artists in the collection that are on views in the galleries, but looking for things that are sort of unexpected. So definitely started with doing searches in the database, talking to my colleagues who know the collection much better than I do. I've been with the museum nearly 5 years, and I'm still learning all of the collection in that sense. So looking at particularly Wisconsin painters and sculptors, and using the resources and the archive that we have available at the museum to start to dig in and pull out artists that I wasn't aware of, works that I wasn't. This is one of my favorites that I have here, the Garrett Sinclair. And really being able, I love the way that you put it, of being able to encounter something unexpected. And another factor that I was looking at when thinking about how do I showcase Milwaukee scenes in general was also wanting to make sure that we were presenting works that were ready for display. And so thinking about what was in our collection that could be easily accessible, that our public maybe hadn't seen before. A couple of them have been featured in the previous Milwaukee Public Library exhibitions.
Great, thank you. That yeah, that's really helpful to think about sort of your starting point, because I was thinking as you were talking, some of the artists I know, and some of them I still don't know as well after many years here, and the like to how to even begin to lay them out. You mentioned, and actually I have to also, on a side note, it was fun to see Joseph Freebert's Tenements at Night, which has hung in my office previously. Members might not know that there are certain works in the collection when they're not out in the galleries that are that can be hung in offices that have a space, sort of away from, we have windowless offices here, some of us. And so it's fun to see that in a different setting at the library.
Yeah,
so
and also just another note on process when thinking about works that can be on display for the length of time that we're looking to have them in in the space at the library is also limiting to paintings that are on solid structures. So in the instance of Freebert, we have multiple works, additional works in the collection, but some of them are works on paper, and those can't be on display for the lengths of time that we would need to for this long-term loan. This exhibition is currently slated to be on loan through January 2022, so another year. It's already been on view for a year, but the majority of that, as we know, has been inaccessible to the public. Another really interesting way that I've been learning more about the collection has been through looking at credit lines, and then also the years that they were acquired. So I made a point to state every time that the works were acquired, because that does speak to the history of the museum as a collecting institution. Also looking at credit lines and seeing a name that you're not familiar with and going, well, who is that person, and did they donate anything else to the museum? That's also a really interesting way to see how collectors in the area had built their individual collections and then their gifting processes to institutions, whether it's the Milwaukee Public Museum or the Museum of Wisconsin Art. So that's another part of the process of going through and selecting works.
Great. Related to sort of the logistics of having an exhibition offsite at the public library, you're getting lots of kudos, by the way, that I hope you'll get a chance to read about your talk and these works that are unknown and how much the library is a treasure to many of us. So how other logistical challenges to mounting an exhibition offsite, lighting, temperature, space considerations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was one slide that I was considering putting in. The one person that I could not name in my thanks was a gentleman, I didn't get his name, when we were installing on site, who works for the library, had brought a lift through to do the lighting. And so we had somebody, of course, from the Milwaukee Public Library that was willing to work with us to make sure that the pieces were well lit in the space once we had installed them. So if you've been to the library, or even from some of my images, actually I could go back, you can notice that the library has these columns that does make installing, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier because you know that you only have a specific amount of space to fill. In the instance of my exhibition, I laid it out so there was essentially one work per bay, if you will. The Wisconsin Women Artists exhibition, because they were smaller works, some of them could fill two images to a bay. This presented just logistics, a logistical issue from a curatorial standpoint of wanting to lay out the exhibition and limited it to a certain number of works. But then also it made for lighting pretty easy because each one of the bays automatically had a couple of cans of lights already sat in them. So lighting wasn't as tricky as one would have thought. Getting the works there, I give full credit to our registrar and preparator team. I met them there and they brought the works safely, and we were working, of course, with Paula Namath and her staff at the library to install the works at that time, Monday before noon, before the library opened to the public. As we know at the museum, we often have to close off galleries if we're going to be trading the works, rotating the works in and out. And so in this instance, because it is a thoroughfare, and this image, you can see the elevator is on the right-hand side, which is the only accessible point to the second floor from the front end of the building for individuals who need the elevator. We couldn't close that space for installation beyond what the library was already closed to the public for. So that was a logistical hurdle as far as scheduling.
Thank you. Now I lost the other question I was looking for here. So
Give a shout out to Jane. I did see that feline.
I did too. That was great. So Jill asked, are these works that are rarely or never exhibited in the museum? Which again, I often, when I'm doing tours of the museum, it's often a surprise, probably not so much to our members, but we have, 30,000 works in the collection, and normally on view in our galleries here in the museum is, maybe 2,000 of those 30,000. So, but if you want to say a little bit more about when and how these works have historically been exhibited, or
yeah, I'm just thinking back to also, so I joined the museum in 2016, so it was following the reinstallation, and at that time, with the expanding galleries, I think the number of works on display at any given time was able to move up from 1,500 to 2,500, and you can fact check me on that one. But I think the nature of being a collecting institution is that you have a lot more works than you have the space to put on display. I would love to speak more specifically to when these works were shown previously. I don't have that information top of hand, but I do know, given from some of the works are a little bit more well known, that they have been on display. I'm sure the George Robb work had been displayed previously, and then I know a couple of the works, like I said, were in previous iterations of the long-term loans at the library. Speaking to the collaboration between the public library and the museum, of course, as I had said, it gives the opportunity for us to display more works, but then also speak to common themes of focusing on Wisconsin arts and artists. There are a number of works by Wisconsin artists on display in the second floor American galleries. I know has a few, but it's the nature of a large collecting institution that we can't have our works on display all at the same time, even if we would want to.
Right, which is actually one of the silver linings of our, at least in education department where I work, that we're doing virtual programming right now, and everything is on view because
Exactly.
But yes, I like to think that keeps us all coming back because there are always new things coming in and out of the deep holdings.
Yes, there's always that, and then speaking to the Google Arts and Culture project, I know Catherine Sowinski in the curatorial department has been working to migrate a lot of the closer look card information to Google Arts and Culture to get more of the works that, of course, right now aren't on view because they would be on the second floor, to make them so that they're more accessible. The museum is also working on enhancing the amount of information, including images that are available on the collection.mam.org website, which makes just a fraction even of our works available for public display in a digital format.
Great, thank you. We have a few more questions here. One, I think you sort of touched on a little bit. How well known are the local artists of this period beyond the Milwaukee area?
Yeah, I would say I've been living in Milwaukee now for, is it 12 or 13 years? I was not aware, even it being really heavily involved in the arts, I was not aware of these artists, most of them before I started looking into pulling together this exhibition. Some of them are very well known internationally, and I did speak to that in the presentation. Regionally, I think they're all really well known as well. The Museum of Wisconsin Art has a large repository for biographical information that is well known regionally also. And then thinking to the influence that they had on generations of Milwaukeeans that would then become artists and go on. So I think that the impact that the artists have, whether they are well known outside of Milwaukee, the impact that they have is far reaching.
And then there's, so since we're focusing on the artists, I'll ask this one first. Hulda Fisher taught at a community school. Is there more information on that school, Erin?
I could look to see. So yeah, she was at the Shorewood school for 30 years. And unfortunately, I was trying to dig a little bit more to her. She's the only female artist that's included in this incarnation of the exhibition. The Museum of Wisconsin art, her biography on there is wholly lacking. I intend to do a lot more research on her, including, trying to find the exact location of her studio on Downer Street, or Downer Avenue, rather. That's an untapped piece of research yet. I would love to find more about if that was a previous incarnation. Some of the, just like the Milwaukee Art Museum changed names over time, a lot of the schools also did. So I know UW of Milwaukee has changed names in the last century. And so looking at that piece, if that Shorewood Opportunity School had changed names, that's certainly a rabbit hole of research that I've yet to explore.
So these are two unrelated questions, but I'm going to ask, they're both short questions, so I'll ask them together. One is, could you remind us how long the exhibition will be up? But also, were there any provisions made for security at the library that you can speak to?
So the exhibition is up through, right now anticipated, January 2022. And so speaking to the history, the initial loan that we had was a long-term loan that ended up being something around 10 years, which is not unheard of for long-term exhibitions. I'll just say when I was working at the Dia Art Foundation at Dia Beacon, the long-term loans there were like 30 years long. So it's not uncommon for institutions to arrange long-term loans of exhibitions. And then for this exhibition specifically, we're looking at a 2-year long-term loan. The library is really interested in collaborating to do more thematic exhibitions, which was sort of the impetus for Brandon Rood curating the Wisconsin Women Artists. So focusing on a specific theme to create the works. And moving into Milwaukee Scenes, of course, Paula Nemeth was helpful in making sure that we could install the works in a safe manner. Of course, I gave full trust to, again, the preparator team to make sure that it was installed well.
Okay. And then I think we're looking to have some time for breakout groups. So before I hand it back over to Elizabeth, I just want to echo so many of the notes of gratitude, how it connects to Historic Milwaukee Tours, how it just connects really to the people and places we're so desperately missing right now as we shelter in place. And then echo Rachel's words at the end here. I hope we can all see these works in person at the public library soon. Until then, we'll see you in the drive-through, picking up our books and our media. And thank you so much, Erin.